In today's journey, we will be covering the stabilization, degassing, and clarification process of the WinExpert Pink Moscato from 2020. Before venturing forth, you will want to make sure that you have fermented for 14 days and that you have reached a specific gravity of 0.996. Failure to do so may lead to cloudy or excessively sweet wine. And as you can see, our fermentation went pretty well aside from some data logging errors. So we are ready to move on to the stabilization phase. If you're following along with your instructions, that's step 2. And according to those instructions, we are going to need the Kiosol for clarification and the potassium metabisulfite potassium sorbate combo package. This stabilizer duo is not only going to kill all the yeast that's left over, but prevent any from coming back later. This is not an optional step in this style of wine. But the first thing we need to do is transfer from the primary fermenter into the secondary. For this phase, we recommend a 6-gallon glass carboy. 6 gallons to limit any headspace, and glass so that you can see how well it's clarifying. And pro tip, if you're using gravity to do your transfers like we are in this video, you will either want to ferment in position for doing the transfer, or move the vessel and then let it rest for about 2 to 6 hours before actually doing the transfer to help minimize loss. This will allow any of the sediment that's been allowed to re-roust back into solution a chance to fall out and not be transferred over into secondary. We probably lost about a bottle to a bottle and a half due to Phil's neglect. If this is your first time using an autosiphon, we do recommend doing a test run with water first. Probably the hardest part about this phase is accepting transferring some of the sludge over. Remember, the next phase is clarification, so if anything does make its way over, it's going to be clarified later on regardless. Ideally, you do want to get away from as many dead yeast cells as possible, but we're not making award-winning wine here, we're having a fun hobby. Not to knock the classics line, but if this were a private reserve or a limited edition from WinExpert, we'd be a little more concerned. The most important things to be mindful of is keeping your equipment sanitized and avoid oxidizing the wine by splashing around. Otherwise, the hardest part is just maximizing your transfer by maximizing that tilt. We didn't get a good shot of it today, but if you want to maximize your tilt, check out the carboy wedge to aid you in this endeavor. Today, we're freehanding it, and that kind of confidence can lead to trouble. But like we said, don't worry if you get some of that sludge over like this. It'll clear up with everything else. Pro tip on making cleanup a breeze, do it immediately after the transfer. And if you're wondering, we probably could have saved at least half of this had we let it rest between the transfer today and moving the vessel. But having cleaned everything out and recovering our tilt hydrometer, we're ready to move on to the next step. That includes taking the stabilizer packet, sanitizing the outside if you feel so inclined. Our table's always covered in sanitizer. Clip the corner off to make pouring a little easier, and that way you can do it without a funnel. But this mixture of potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate will do the job of killing off any remaining yeast and prevent any from growing back in the future. This is really important because in a later step we will be adding more sugar in the reserve pack. That's also where the color is going to come from. And for the next step, we recommend using power tools. The mixture is not an upsell. It is a quality of life improvement. And when it comes to getting it in the hole, you'll want to get your hand covered in sanitizer to guide it in. Mix thoroughly for about 3 minutes, switching directions every 30 seconds. And if done properly, we should be done with the degassing stage at this point and can move on to clarification with the Kiosol. Again, just cut off the corner. We like to give it a little pinch just to make sure that's opened all the way. Feel free to remove the mixture for this part, but we leave it in just to one less chance for something to go wrong. Plus, we're about to use it again anyways to mix this in and get a little bonus degassing in. If we're gonna have to mix in the Kiosol anyways, we may as well do some. Just remember it's degassing, so avoid any big splashes or waves. Now there's only 2 more things we need to do before letting this sit for about 24 hours. First, we want to throw in our digital tilt hydrometer just to keep an eye on the stats. Also, you'll want to top it with either an airlock or a solid bung. After that, we just need to clean up the rest of the stuff from the day and wait 24 hours. This is the time needed to make sure that all the yeast dies off before we add the sugar in the next step. Speaking of the next step, we're going to need the last of the ingredients that come in the kit, including the Kaido stand and the reserve pack. This is where the sweetness and color will come from. And if you're following along on your home instructions, we're in step 3 now. And the last thing that should be left in your box is the labels. But we won't need those until bottling. But unfortunately, there's no getting around needing a funnel today. We highly recommend the anti-splash funnel, because you definitely don't want to miss a drop or get this on any carpeting. And not spilling a drop can sometimes be the hardest part, as that lid is definitely on there. You don't want to just grab it and rip it off. For a more elegant solution, grab a blunt object that you can wedge between the lid and pry it off with some leverage. If you're still having trouble, just cut off one of the corners and pour it out that way. But as you can see, the difference now is night and day. A good way to think about it is that we just added the essence of the wine to the mix, where before it was just a neutral wine base with not much flavor. But because it's basically concentrated sugar, it's gonna need some help to mix together properly. As you can see, it definitely doesn't want to mix naturally right now. So get the mixture out again and give it a good swirl until it's a nice consistent dark color. In fact, it's so dark you can actually see the reflection of all the cameras in the carboy. But ignore that and we'll move on to the final step today, mixing in the chitosan, the second half of the clarification tag team. And these two work so well together that you're basically guaranteed a crystal clear wine so long as you follow the directions properly. Most commonly caused by a spontaneous second fermentation due to improper stabilization. This can often be fixed by adding more potassium sorbate and clarifiers after the yeast is dead. But once this is all thoroughly mixed, we are basically done for the day. All we've left to do is replace the airlock or put a solid bung in. The latter being the preferred method, as the wine at this point can create a vacuum, meaning that if you use a primary airlock like we're using today, you run the risk of sucking in some of that sanitized liquid into the wine. We have to go pick some up from the store. And speaking of the store, don't forget to check out some of our affiliate links below, click on that subscribe button, or check out some of our other videos, as all of these things will help us out one way or another, and help us make better content in the future. And of course, if you're having any troubles, leave a comment below.